I stood in the bustling living room of Dave's parents' estate, nursing a drink and taking in the scene around me. The warmth from the fireplace battled against the winter chill seeping through the windows, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the grand scale of the house. My eyes wandered across the room, catching glimpses of old friends and unfamiliar faces, all gathered to bid farewell to Dave before he embarked on his Air Force journey. As I scanned the crowd, my gaze landed on a striking figure that seemed to command attention without even trying. Bunty, Mark's girlfriend, stood out like a rare gem among river stones. Her long brunette hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face that could stop traffic. Those big brown eyes sparkled with mischief, hinting at a depth I couldn't quite fathom. I watched as she laughed at something someone said, her posh accent carrying across the room. There was something magnetic about her, an energy that drew people in. I couldn't help but wonder how she and Mark had ended up together. Mark stood beside her, looking, well, ordinary. He smiled politely at the conversation happening around him, but seemed almost faded next to Bunty's vibrant presence. I'd known Mark since university, and while he was a decent guy, he'd never struck me as particularly remarkable. Bunty, on the other hand, radiated an untamed spirit that seemed at odds with the prim and proper facade she presented. I caught myself staring and quickly averted my gaze, but not before she glanced in my direction. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and I felt a jolt of electricity run through me. I took a long swig of my drink, trying to shake off the effect she had on me. This was Dave's party, after all, and I was here to celebrate my friend's new chapter in life. But as the night wore on, I found my attention continually drawn back to Bunty, wondering what lay beneath that polished exterior. As the night unfolded, I found myself gravitating towards Bunty. We'd bump into each other by the drinks table, exchange knowing glances across the room, and somehow always end up in the same conversations. "Want to escape for a bit?" she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. I nodded, following her up the grand staircase to the second floor. We slipped into a bathroom, its marble countertops and gold fixtures a stark contrast to what we were about to do. Bunty pulled out a small bag of white powder, her eyes glinting with excitement. "You indulge?" she asked, already cutting 2 neat lines on the counter. On occasion, I replied, watching as she leaned down, her hair falling forward like a curtain. She straightened up, sniffing and wiping her nose delicately. "Your turn," she purred, handing me a rolled-up bill. The Coke hit my system like a lightning bolt, sharpening every sensation. Bunty's presence seemed even more intoxicating now, her every movement hypnotic. We talked in hushed tones, our faces close. She vented about Mark, her frustrations pouring out. "He's just so boring," she sighed. "I feel like I'm suffocating." I listened, nodding sympathetically. With each confession, I felt our connection deepen. Her hand brushed against mine as she gesticulated, lingering longer each time. Her eyes, when they met mine, held a suggestive glint that sent shivers down my spine. As we rejoined the party, Bunty stayed close. Her touches became more frequent, a hand on my arm, a playful nudge. The unspoken tension between us grew, electric and dangerous. I knew I was treading on thin ice, but I couldn't bring myself to step back. The desire to explore this connection, to see where it might lead, was overwhelming. The party had wound down, most guests retreating to their rooms for the night. I found myself in the kitchen, searching for a late-night snack. The house was quiet, save for the distant murmur of a few lingering conversations. Bunty appeared in the doorway, her eyes gleaming with mischief. She sauntered towards me, her hips swaying hypnotically. The air between us crackled with tension. "Fancy meeting you here," she purred, closing the distance between us. My heart raced. The Coke still coursed through my veins, heightening every sensation. Bunty's proximity was intoxicating, her scent enveloping me. Without warning, she pressed her lips to mine. The kiss was electric, passionate, and hungry. For a moment, a flicker of resistance sparked in my mind. This was wrong. Mark was just upstairs, Dave's parents' house. I surrendered to the moment, to the intoxicating allure of her touch. Our kisses deepened, growing more urgent. "I've wanted this all night," she breathed against my neck, her words sending shivers down my spine. I couldn't form a coherent response, lost in the sensations of her touch, her taste, her warmth. The world beyond this kitchen ceased to exist. There was only Bunty, only this moment, only the fire igniting between us. Holy shit. Every fantasy I'd ever had about this woman paled in comparison to this moment. Hesitation evaporated. Desire took over. God, you're beautiful, I managed to say, my eyes devouring every inch of her. With hurried movements, our remaining clothes disappeared. The cold kitchen air juxtaposed with the feverish heat. I held her close, my fingers grazing her flawless skin. The tension between us was electric, the kind that makes every nerve tingle with anticipation. She turned to face me, those large, expressive eyes burning with desire. Do you remember what I whispered? Her voice was barely audible, but the promise lingered in the air. My heart pounded as I nodded, reaching for the nearest item in the kitchen, an unopened stick of butter. It wasn't ideal, but in this moment the need to touch, to feel, surpassed all logic. I smeared the butter across my fingers. Ready, I whispered, searching her face for any hint of hesitation. Bunty gave a slight nod, turning around. After everything, she cleaned me with a smile on her face. In the aftermath, Bunty's insatiable nature lay bare. Her grin, a wickedly delightful mixture of satisfaction and mischief, made my chest tighten. Those intense brown eyes looked up at me, holding my gaze with an electric connection. It was a look that screamed for more, one that promised further dives into the depths of our forbidden indulgences. I could still feel the residual slickness from the butter on my skin, a messy reminder of our fun. You're something else, I murmured, the words barely a whisper escaping my lips. She pulled back momentarily, her lips glistening. You like that, didn't you? Her voice was velvet. God, yes, I replied, my voice hoarse from the strain of keeping control. The words felt inadequate to capture the storm raging inside me. Every nerve in my body was alight, and all I could think about was her Bunty. She smiled a smile that said we were only getting started. Then she dove back in like she had all the time in the world. I braced myself against the countertop, the coolness a stark contrast to the heat between us. Over the next 2 nights, the intensity between Bunty and me only grew. We were like magnets, constantly drawn to each other, unable to resist the pull. The mansion, with its sprawling rooms and hidden corridors, became our playground. One minute we were sharing stolen glances at a party. The next we were wrapped around each other in a darkened corner. There was a moment in the library, surrounded by dusty old tomes, where she pressed me against the bookshelf, her lips trailing fire down my neck. Shh, we can't be too loud, she whispered, barely containing her own excitement. The restriction only made it more exhilarating. Another time, we found our way to the garden shed, the scent of earth and flowers mingling with our sweat. She pushed me against the wooden wall. I've never felt like this before, I managed to say between ragged breaths. Good, she replied, her eyes dark and needy. Neither have I. Our passion was raw and unfiltered, like nothing I'd ever experienced. Each touch, kiss, every shared breath drove us deeper into uncharted territory. The risk of being caught only amplified everything. During a gathering in the main hall, we slipped away to an upstairs balcony. As the guests mingled below, she turned to me with that signature grin. Think anyone would notice if we disappeared for a bit? She teased. They're too busy with their gossip, I replied. Whispered promises flowed between us, a shared understanding that this weekend would end, but what we were building might not. By the time Sunday rolled around, we'd shared countless moments, each one a perfect blend of urgency and connection. In the quiet aftermath, while the mansion returned to its stately silence, I stood staring at the place where we'd shared so much. The memories weren't just fading images, they were burned into me. Like ink on a page, the taste of Bunty's wildness lingering long after we parted ways. I woke up with my head pounding, feeling like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my skull. The memories of the past few days came flooding back, and a wave of guilt washed over me. What had I done? The thought of facing Bunty and Mark made my stomach churn. Dragging myself out of bed, I stumbled downstairs, bracing for the awkwardness that was sure to come. But to my surprise, Bunty and Mark were in the kitchen, acting as if nothing had happened. Bunty was helping Mark with the coffee maker, laughing at something he'd said. Morning, Ben, Mark called out, far too cheerfully for my hungover state. You look like death warmed over. I managed a weak smile. Feel like it too. the kitchen filled with the smell of sizzling bacon and brewing coffee. Dave was at the stove, flipping eggs and sausages. The normalcy of it all felt surreal. "Grab a plate," Dave said. "Nothing cures a hangover like a full English." I nodded, grateful for the distraction. As I loaded up my plate, I couldn't help but steal glances at Bunty. She caught my eye once, giving me a small, secret smile before turning back to Mark. We all gathered around the table, the clinking of cutlery and mugs filling the air. I reached for a piece of toast, my hand hovering over the butter dish. As I spread it on my bread, memories of that night in the kitchen flashed through my mind. The butter Bunty right here on this very table. I felt my face flush and quickly took a large bite of toast to hide my reaction. Bunty was calmly sipping her tea across from me, as if butter had never been used for anything other than toast in her life. No more drugs, no more Bunty. I had to get my act together. We decided to brave the Yorkshire countryside for a walk, bundling up in layers. The crisp air felt good on my face as we set out, but our plans were quickly dashed by a sudden downpour of freezing rain. We rushed back inside, laughing and shaking off the water like a pack of dogs. "Well, so much for that," Dave chuckled, running a hand through his damp hair. Mark clapped his hands together. Right then, who's up for some drinking games? And just like that, the party was back in full swing. Bottles appeared, music blared, and the living room became a hub of laughter and friendly competition. I nursed a beer, determined to keep my wits about me. As the night wore on, I felt a familiar presence at my side. Bunty leaned in close, her breath warm on my ear. "Want to have some real fun?" she whispered, producing a small bag of white powder. I shook my head firmly. "No thanks, I'm good." She pouted, trailing a finger down my arm. "Come on, Ben, don't be boring." I said no, Bunty, I insisted, trying to edge away. Her eyes flashed with mischief. "Well, if not that. How about something else?" She pressed closer, her body flush against mine. "I've got a few ideas that don't involve any chemicals." I swallowed hard, my resolve wavering. "Bunty, we can't." She silenced me with a finger to my lips. "Shaish, no one has to know. Don't you want to feel that rush again?" I tried to ignore the seductive pull of her words, but Bunty's persistence was relentless. She slipped her hand into mine and tugged me towards the hallway. "Come on, Ben. Just a few minutes," she whispered. I felt my resolve weakening as I followed her, each step echoing my inner conflict. We slipped into the bathroom, and she locked the door behind us. "Bunty, we really shouldn't," I murmured, but my words lacked conviction. She didn't waste time, full of fire and unspoken promises. Any resistance melted away. I gasped as she dropped to her knees, her eyes locking onto mine. "Trust me, Ben. You'll love it," she said with a smirk. Her enthusiasm and skill shattered my flimsy resolve. I could no longer hold back. After it, she pulled away, a triumphant grin on her face, skin glistening with evidence of my surrender. "See, Ben, don't ever say no to me again." Her lips pulled away, cheeks flushed and eyes wild. I laughed, breathless and incredulous at where we'd found ourselves. The bathroom had become our hideaway, each secret visit charging my veins with electricity. "Let's get back before they start asking questions," I suggested, though I doubted they'd dare. Bunty flashed a mischievous grin, smoothing her dress. "Every hour, Ben. Meet me back here." Her command lingered in my head even as we rejoined the others. The party buzzed around us, but I barely noticed. Low conversations, clinking glasses, and muted laughter faded into the background. All I could think about was how she'd looked up at me, the heat behind her taunting smile. We navigated through the night like secret agents, slipping away every hour on the dot. The bathroom was ours, a sanctuary. Rumors swirled that we were sneaking off to do drugs. "Do you ever get tired of surprising me?" I asked, my voice huskier than I'd ever heard it. She smirked. "Never. I live for it." Every encounter felt stolen, doused in the thrill of getting caught, an unspoken dare hanging in the air between us. Her eyes flashed with challenge, and I found myself lost in the depths of her wild nature. She pushed every boundary, tested every limit, and I couldn't help but follow her lead. "Think they have any idea?" I asked once, pressing my forehead to hers. "Does it matter?" Her laugh was wicked. "Let them wonder." Mark glanced our way, suspicion in his eyes, but I just shrugged it off. Bunty squeezed my hand under the table, a silent promise of more to come. The dance between us was intoxicating, every risky moment pulling me deeper into her world. Her eyes locked onto mine across the room, a tantalizing promise hidden in her wicked smile. The way she moved, I couldn't tear my gaze away. Every step she took was a calculated seduction, and she knew exactly what it did to me. I followed her, as if on autopilot, drawn by some invisible force. In the dim light of the corridor, she pressed against me, her breath hot in my ear. "How far do you think you can push it?" she whispered, the challenge clear. "Why don't we find out?" She laughed softly, a thrillingly devious sound. "Follow me." We ducked into a small storage closet, a new hideaway. Bunty wasted no time. We'd grown bolder, our encounters more daring. The thrill of possibly being caught only added fuel to the fire. "Someone could walk in," I murmured, but made no move to stop. "Let them," she breathed. "I dare them." The combination of her brazen defiance and my own reckless abandon was intoxicating. We knew the risk, we felt the danger. But in that moment, it was just us and the fire we couldn't quench. We collapsed against the cool wall of the closet, our breaths heavy and ragged. Bunty's eyes glimmered with mischief, contrasting with the vulnerable look that crept in, just under the surface. She traced a finger over the scar on my eyebrow, a habit she'd picked up after our first encounter. "You know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "Mark hates anything unconventional." "Oh," I replied, arching an eyebrow. I felt the curiosity and a pang of jealousy mingling in my chest. "Yeah, let's just say he's very traditional," she sighed. "He despises anything related to backyard." Her gaze flicked up to meet mine, filled with something wild and desperate. "That's why I'm so drawn to you, Ben. You're different." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I nodded, feeling the excitement build within me. "Is that so?" I said, my voice trying to stay calm, even as my heart raced. "Yes, and about our next," she smirked, tugging at her lip sensually. "I've got an idea. How do you feel about incorporating some butter, like a first time?" "Isn't that what you love?" she continued. I didn't need to answer. The look in my eyes said it all. The thrill, the danger, the intoxication of our secret world, it consumed me. And Bunty was the perfect partner in this dance. I found myself constantly scanning rooms, looking for her. My heart raced every time I caught a glimpse of Bunty's dark hair or heard her melodic laugh. Our encounters had become a drug, and I was hopelessly addicted. We'd developed a system of subtle signals. A raised eyebrow, a casual touch of her earring, a seemingly innocent comment about the weather, each had a hidden meaning that only we understood. It was our secret language, and it thrilled me to no end. But with every stolen moment, the fear grew. I'd wake up in cold sweats, dreaming of Mark bursting in on us. During conversations, I'd stumble over my words, terrified I'd slip up and reveal our secret. The constant tension was exhausting, yet exhilarating. One afternoon, we nearly got caught in Dave's parents' study. The sound of footsteps sent us scrambling, and I barely managed to duck behind a curtain as the door opened. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would give me away. But Bunty, cool as ever, engaged the intruder in casual conversation, buying me time to slip out unnoticed. That close call should have been a wake-up call, but instead, it only intensified our desire. The next time we met, our passion was wilder, more urgent. It was as if we were trying to outrun the consequences that loomed ever closer. I began to neglect my other relationships. Friends commented on my distraction, my sudden unavailability, but I couldn't bring myself to care. All that mattered was the next moment I could steal with Bunty. The guilt ate at me, especially when Mark was around. Yet, perversely, his presence only heightened my desire for Bunty. Every shared glance across a crowded room felt like a victory, a secret I'd stolen from right under his nose.